pleasure to actually introduce our guest this morning. Sitting in a nice spot in Pasadena, or close there too. David Oberhettinger is CKO Emeritus at NASA JPL. So say hello everybody. Hello David. David and I have spent quite a good time on Skype sort of sorting through this idea of your role as a steward, particularly in your leadership, and particularly today your role as a steward of the corporate knowledge and intellectual capital that your company has. So you've all read the bio. I don't need to go through that. David's very practical. I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. So David, thank you very much for choosing to join us this morning. I really appreciate it. And all yours.
Okay, let's see here. So, good day, and I'd like to thank Professor Pender for giving me this opportunity to participate in your class at the University of Adelaide. Professor Pender speaks of a 5-point leadership model with a current emphasis on the stewardship element. And what would we be seeking to husband, if not knowledge, as steward? Carved onto the portico of the U.S. Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., is a quote from Socrates. There is only one good, namely knowledge, and only one evil, namely ignorance. So toward the advancement of the former and to mitigate the latter, and everyone can hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to speak of the role of the knowledge steward. Due to potential latency problems with the Zoom app we're using, I'd like to hold questions to the end. I'll also pause after a slide transition to give the slide time to catch up with us. So, let's see. Yeah. The Knowledge Steward Challenge. In some industries, firms invest more in knowledge-based capital than they do in physical capital, such as equipment and buildings. If your business is like that, and it's successful, there is probably something you know that makes you competitive. Coca-Cola Corporation, it's probably marketing knowledge. If it's JPL, it's engineering knowledge. Yet, knowledge is often treated as if it has little or no value in terms of reuse. The Romans used pozzolan concrete to build large structures. Roman baths, you see here the Pantheon and the Colosseum. But the formula for concrete was lost for 1,000 years until a textbook was discovered in the year 1414. They built Roman baths from England to Turkey. And then the world just forgot how to make large concrete structures. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but we have US politicians who say the US is going to take back manufacturing jobs from China. But I point out that during World War I, the US had 300,000 machinists. Today, the master machinists would likely fit in a large conference room. We've lost the sovereign capability. It is even easier for a company to lose the knowledge that is critical to their competitive edge. Key institutional knowledge may be lost unless leadership supports active measures to retain it. What is the NASA Caltech Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL? JPL is this world's leading spacecraft design and operations center for the robotic exploration of deep space. We have visited all the planets and discovered, except for Pluto, but we took care of that. We made it no longer a planet. And discovered 28 Earth-like exoplanets, placed 4 rovers on Mars, landed by a liquid methane lake on Titan, and both Voyager spacecraft have left the solar system and are operating in interstellar space after 40 years. NASA assigns JPL high-risk exploration missions that have never before been attempted. Like defense work, this task is knowledge intensive. JPL invents products where we may make only a single unit, which may cost $1 billion US, that is designed to go somewhere humankind has never ventured. You know? The mission portfolio on the next 2 slides I'm going to show you represents a sovereign capability that is transnational, arguably transplanetary. These are current JPL spaceflight projects, and you probably can't see them all that well, but the current spacecraft projects, JPL is flying about 33 major missions, not including spaceborne instruments, but major missions. That is 33 that have been launched and are still sending back science data. Can you see slide 5?
Yeah.
This is JPL spaceflight projects in development. So in addition, we have to 33, we have another 22 major spacecraft in development. For example, the $2.4 billion Mars 2020 rover just left the JPL campus and is due to be launched in July from the launch complex. And I am also excited at the possibility of discovering life on Europa. We have a probe going there. So how is space exploration similar to a naval vessel development program? Well, naval build programs similarly feature, if not single unit production, then few unit production. It's not like cans of Coca-Cola churning off the assembly line. Submarines are also designed for an extreme and remote physical environment. I'll be more specific in a couple slides. The photo here is of the Curiosity rover, Mars Science Laboratory, currently roving Mars, taking a selfie. By the way, I could explain why the camera at the end of the robotic arm is not visible in the photo, but that's just more JPL wizardry, okay? So the mission environment, for both warships and spacecraft, if key knowledge is lost, the next build faces not only the cost and schedule impact of restoring the knowledge, but also additional risk because the heritage knowledge was proven in ground test and in operation in space. Now, extreme risk calls for what I call extreme engineering. The extreme risk of space exploration is extreme complexity. I mean, for example, redundancy, redundant units perform the same function if one fails, fault tolerance, onboard autonomy featuring error correction, all of which is attained by what I term extreme engineering. We tend to speak of design heritage, which implies a mature design that is reusable. But we at JPL have learned that heritage is just a word. The knowledge gained on the prior project usually has to be revalidated. So JPL systems are often one of a kind, high unit value, as I mentioned, but that must operate with precision in an extremely hostile environment. Our deep impact mission you see here in 2005 involved an optically navigated flying copper bullet that ran head-on into a comet while being tracked on the mothership all autonomously. While the probe is traveling at a relative velocity of about 1,000 kilometers per hour at the time of impact. And you see the impact here, made a big bang. Yeah, it's in space. So what do I mean by extreme engineering? When the Cassini spacecraft, reached Saturn in 2004, after its 7-year cruise from Earth, it faced a severe radiation environment for the next dozen years. And the Huygens probe that it released had to descend to the surface of Titan, the moon, the Jovian moon, through an atmosphere similar to Earth's primordial soup and land on a beach next to a liquid hydrocarbon lake. Most electronic systems and components supplied by industry are intended for an office environment. When the Galileo probe encountered the atmosphere of Jupiter, which before was flattened like a tin can, it decelerated at 230 Gs, 230 gravities, and the heat shield protecting the electronics reached twice the temperature of the surface of the sun. So when we figure out how to design and test for these conditions, don't you think we should make an effort to remember how we did it? Yeah. If we didn't, the lost knowledge would not be easily restored. Mars Entry, Descent, and Landing, or EDL, is surely an example of sovereign capability, because JPL is the only organization that lands on Mars. Right? And it's an incredibly complex sequence. Lander must, as you see, it's not all that easy for you to read there, but the lander in the graphic, but the lander must separate from the cruise stage. The aeroshell must encounter the Martian atmosphere at exactly the right angle, or the lander will either burn up or skip off the atmosphere of Mars. The flight software then must deploy the parachute. Then the heat shield at the proper time must be separated from the lander without recontacting the lander, putting a big dent in it. All those events triggered by the precise firing of over 60 pyrotechnic devices, pyros we call them. Now, our last rover was too heavy for airbags to cushion its landing. So we came up with this, you see the color picture here. We came up with a sky crane that you'll see in the upcoming video. NASA headquarters, though, they thought we were playing a practical joke on them when we introduced this solution to the no airbag problem, too heavy for airbags. Let's see. I switched the order here. Oh, that's fine. While you're watching this short video, I'd like you to ponder the impact of the loss of the key knowledge that represents this sovereign capability. Successfully landing on Mars is one of the great accomplishments, one of the great achievements of humankind, along with building the pyramids, digging the Panama Canal, and laying down the transcontinental railway. There have been over 20 missions to Mars by the Russians, the Soviets, and Great Britain, and Europeans. And JPL is the only lab that has landed on Mars successfully. This video will explain why it can be so incredibly difficult to land on Mars, but as knowledge stewards, you need to recognize that the critical knowledge, if lost, cannot simply be reobtained from somewhere else. No one else does it. You don't take active measures to capture and retain the unique knowledge, and it's simply gone from human ken. Let me see if I can. Okay. Through the video. Time player, no. Okay, let me, there you go.
When people look at it, it looks crazy. That's a very natural thing.
Minutes of terror, because we've got literally 7 minutes.
Oh, okay, why don't you play it at your end then?
Okay, I'll play at my end.
Yeah, it might have been the trying to force too much through a small pipeline.
David, we're back with you.
Oh, did it go well?
Yeah, it did. It's great.
Oh, okay, you're able to hear it.
Yes.
So where was I? Oh, here's an actual example of key knowledge that was lost like the Roman concrete. Now, rocket engines are typically of two kinds. Either continuously thrusting at a constant output or pulsing. But the Mars Science Laboratory, the Curiosity descent stage, also known as the sky crane, needed rockets where you could adjust the output, like the accelerator pedal in a car varies the engine output. Why? Because the sky crane needed to have the capability to make fine adjustments to hover off the surface of Mars while it lowered the rover to the ground and then cut the cables and flew off. The sky crane flew off. So you needed a throttle to slow the descent to a stop. Well, we haven't designed throttleable thrusters since the Mars Viking lander in the early 1970s, and we'd forgotten how to make them. Fortunately, we found some Viking engineers, long since retired, who had drawings in their basements and who remembered how to make the thrusters. We lucked out. If knowledge stewardship adds value, you're still going to have to sell your executives on its benefits, right? So how did I sell our JPL leadership on knowledge stewardship? Has any of you heard of an elevator pitch? Yeah. It's when you encounter the CEO or some other senior executive on his or her way to the top floor in the elevator, and you have 90 seconds to sell him or her on, in this case, knowledge stewardship and the value of intellectual capital to the company. As a knowledge steward, you must advocate for reuse of key knowledge with the leadership and with the rank and file. So we pointed out to JPL leadership that for many companies today, corporate investment in intellectual capital, our people, exceeds investment in physical capital like equipment or buildings. So husbanding the content of employee brains becomes more important than maintaining valuable equipment, making sure everything's working. But I was very clear to my JPL leadership that knowledge management is more than just installing the latest hot computer tool. Now, once again, I looked to history to prove this point. To me, the ideal KM knowledge management system may have been aboard the HMS Beagle, which set sail in the year 1831 with Charles Darwin aboard as supernumerary. It was a voyage of scientific exploration, like our deep space probes. And as any of you history buffs may know, the HMS Beagle's KM system, knowledge management system, benefited from a SharePoint collaborative platform and interactive visualization for data analytics, right? No, not really. In fact, the only books they had on board may well have been the Holy Bible and the Code of Naval Regulations. Didn't have Pulp Fiction novels then. And yet, the knowledge of how to run the ship was very effectively transferred from the experienced officers and sailors to the novices, who were most likely farm workers who had gotten drunk in a bar, or in a pub in this case, and woke up at sea aboard a naval vessel. I told our leadership, if you have $100 to spend on knowledge management or knowledge stewardship, spend $10 on tools and $90 on getting your people to talk to each other. I also spoke to the fiscal benefits of knowledge management. Space missions are expensive, and restoring knowledge that we fail to retain is costly. For JPL, it's also risky because the heritage knowledge we lost had already been proven in ground tests and in spaceflight, said before. JPL knowledge is particularly esoteric. There's also knowledge of how to design electronics that can survive Jupiter's intense radiation environment. Who else could we go to who knows about it? Do any of you know someone who can help us out, who's visited Jupiter? But that's not just JPL. Raise your hand if your company also possesses knowledge that that would be difficult to replace, even if cost was not a factor. And lastly, I said, because NASA told us to. And we're at NASA Lab, as Field Center. As part of their knowledge management initiative, NASA headquarters sent a letter to each Field Center, and including JPL, that says JPL shall appoint a CKO and should champion knowledge management. So we had to. What challenges did we face in instituting knowledge management? One was that the NASA knowledge management program is federated. So NASA headquarters promulgated a broad knowledge management policy, but left it to each of the 10 NASA field centers, including JPL, to work out the details. This gave us great flexibility, but it also meant that NASA gave us no money. And we had to request coverage from JPL overhead funds. But the biggest challenge is that as a chief knowledge officer at JPL, responsible for knowledge management, I don't really manage any knowledge. Our knowledge is effectively managed by subject matter experts in our line organization. I view the problem as cultural. Championing a wide understanding that knowledge has residual value beyond the project that grew the knowledge. Now, after the JPL leadership bought off on my arguments that knowledge is our cash crop, I also had some ideas where to place the chief knowledge officer function. I think it belongs in your product organization. If you're Microsoft, it may belong in the information technology organization because IT is your product. And like I said, if you're Coca-Cola, it may belong in your marketing